10 ultra-rare muscle cars, ranked worst to best. One of them sold at auction for over $2 million. Here's where every one of them belongs. Number 10. 1970 Ford Torino King Cobra. This car never left the factory with a purpose. Ford built it specifically to compete against the Dodge Daytona and Plymouth Superbird on NASCAR superspeedways. The 429 cubic inch engine was serious. The aerodynamic nose was serious. The factory backing was real. Then, before the 1970 season even began, Ford pulled out of NASCAR completely. The King Cobra was canceled overnight. A handful of prototypes survived. The men who drove those cars knew they were driving machines with no future. No race wins ahead, no showroom, no street history waiting for them. That's the whole story of this car. It's rare because it failed before it ever got started. Rare and canceled are not the same thing as rare and great. That's why it starts here. Number 9. 1969 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. The Trans Am was the car that dressed for a fight it wasn't ready for. Only 699 were built in 1969, and every one of them looked exactly right. The stripes, the scoops, the stance. It looked meaner than almost anything else on the road. But looks and horsepower aren't the same. The Ram Air 3 made 335 horsepower in a year when the Camaro Z28, the 440 Charger, and the Cuda were all out there hunting. Men who bought Trans Ams in 1969 spent the next year watching Z28s pull away from them at stoplights and struggling to explain it. The outfit was perfect, the performance wasn't there yet. The Trans Am name became a genuine American legend by the mid-1970s. The 1969 version was still working out what it wanted to be. That gap between image and result is exactly why it sits one step above the car that never raced at all. Number 8. 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30. Nobody saw this car coming. Oldsmobile listed the W30 at 370 horsepower. Actual output was closer to 400. It ran a cold air induction system, an aluminum intake manifold, and fiberglass hood to cut weight where it counted. Drivers who raced W30s at local strips remember pulling away from Chevelles and watching the other guy walk over afterward with a confused look, then seeing the Olds badge and not knowing what to say. But being a surprise only carries you so far. Oldsmobile never had Chevy's marketing reach or Mopar's street credibility, and on a list this competitive, the cars that nobody talked about at the time can't rank above the cars everybody remembers. The W30 sits above the GSX for one reason. It surprised people on the strip with real documented performance numbers. The GSX surprised people with its badge. There's a difference between beating someone and shocking someone. The W30 did both. Number 7. 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. Say the words Buick and muscle car in the same sentence to a car guy and watch his face. That reaction was Buick's entire problem in 1970. Total GSX production that year was 608 cars. Roughly 400 of them carried the Stage 1 package. That package pushed torque to 510 pound-feet, more twisting force than almost anything else you could buy that year. Owners loved pulling next to Chargers and Chevelles at the light and watching what happened when it went green. The guy in the other car never saw it coming from a Buick. But surprise has a ceiling. You shock somebody once, maybe twice. You can't build a lasting legacy on a reaction. The GSX Stage 1 was one devastating punch from a fighter nobody had scouted. One punch is not a career. The 4 cars above it built careers. Number 6. 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. Ford didn't build this car to sell Mustangs. They built it to homologate a 429 cubic inch engine for NASCAR competition. The rules required 500 street cars minimum. Ford built 859. The 429 was so physically large it wouldn't fit under the stock Mustang hood. Engineers had to move the battery to the trunk and completely rework the front suspension geometry just to make it fit. Men who sat in Boss 429s at idle in 1969 describe a low, heavy mechanical pulse that felt less like a car engine and more like the factory that stamped the sheet metal was running underneath them. It wasn't the quickest Mustang of its year. The Boss 302 was better around a road course. The 428 Cobra jet ran quicker quarter-mile times, but nothing else on the road in 1969 carried that particular kind of industrial weight. You didn't buy a Boss 429 to win a stoplight race. You bought it to make a point, and it made one every single time it started. Number 5. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. Nothing else on this list looks like the Daytona, and nothing on a public American road in 1969 looked like it either. The 18-inch nose cone, the rear wing standing 23 inches above the deck lid, engineered specifically to keep the car planted above 200 miles per hour. Charlie Glotzbach ran one to 243 miles per hour in testing. Richard Petty won NASCAR races in it. Only 503 were built for street use. Men who drove Daytonas in 1970 remember pulling into gas stations and watching people walk over from the pump across the lot just to ask what they were looking at. Nobody had ever seen anything like this come out of an American factory, but spectacular design and a racing pedigree don't automatically put you at the top. 4 cars above it were rarer, more capable in the moments that counted, and carried heavier legacies off the track. The Daytona was the most dramatic thing on an American road that year. Dramatic is still not the top 4. Number 4. 1967 Chevrolet Corvette L88. Chevy built this car and then spent the entire year trying to pretend it didn't exist. 1967 Corvettes left the factory with the L88 engine. 20. Chevrolet listed horsepower at 430 on the window sticker, a number carefully chosen to keep insurance companies from asking questions. Actual output was closer to 540. They voided the factory warranty if you ran pump gas through it. They weren't trying to sell you this car, they were trying to keep it away from you. The men who found one anyway already knew what they had before they ever turned the key. But the L88 was a racing engine wearing street clothes, and the street showed that. Cooling and reliability under sustained highway conditions exposed what it actually was, something built for the track that was allowed to exist on public roads. 20 cars, hidden horsepower, and a design that needed race conditions to give you everything it had. That's number 4. The 3 cars above it didn't need a track to destroy everything around them. Number 3. 69 cars. That's the complete production run of the 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. The engine was all aluminum, the same fundamental architecture powering Can-Am race cars that year. The ZL1 package alone cost more than a fully loaded Corvette. Chevrolet's own management didn't want to build it. A dealer in Illinois named Fred Gibb ordered 50 cars directly and forced the factory's hand. Most of them sat on showroom floors for months because the price was beyond what most buyers could write a check for. The ones that got driven told the whole story. Men who lined up against ZL1s at drag strips in 1969 remember one thing. It looked like a regular Camaro. Then the light went green. Stock, no modifications, straight from the dealer. They ran the quarter-mile deep into the 13-second range. Nothing on an American street could leave one behind. That is not opinion. That is what happened every single time. 69 cars. Every one of them capable of that. The only reason it's not higher is that 2 cars on this list were rarer, costlier to find, and carried something beyond pure speed. Number 2. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. This wasn't a street car. Ford just gave it a VIN number. 100 Thunderbolts were built, every single one for one purpose only: drag racing. The 467 high-riser engine breathed through 2 4-barrel carburetors. Ford stripped everything that didn't help it go faster in a straight line. No back seat, plexiglass side windows, plastic headlight covers to save weight. The windshield wipers barely worked. Men who raced Thunderbolts in 1964 remember watching the other driver's face when they realized what had pulled up next to them at the line. By the time that realization finished forming, the race was already over. The Thunderbolt won the 1964 NHRA Winter Nationals. Most of these cars got driven exactly as intended and beaten to death on strips across the country. The ones alive today survived almost by accident. Every single one is a piece of American racing history that probably shouldn't still exist. The reason it's number 2 and not number 1 is this. The Thunderbolt lived entirely on the drag strip. One car above it did everything the Thunderbolt did, in a convertible, with the top down, on a public road. That's a different kind of achievement entirely. Number 1. 14. That's how many 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertibles were produced for the American market. Not 1,400. 14. Examples of this car have sold at auction for over $2 million. These aren't just rare. They are the answer to the question the entire muscle car era was actually trying to answer. What happens when you take the most feared engine in American drag racing and drop it into an open-air car built for the street? The 426 Hemi under that hood, top down, sun on the scoop, rear tires getting crushed under that torque. At that point, it stopped being about horsepower numbers. It became something else. It became want. The kind of want that doesn't go away after 50 years. Every car guy who walked into a Plymouth showroom in 1970 and saw one of these knew he was looking at something he'd never own. Most of them are still right about that. 14 cars. The most valuable American muscle cars ever built. The rarest, the most capable, and the one that made every other machine on this list feel like second place. If any one of these cars brought back something for you, a memory, a driveway, a magazine page from 1970 you never threw away, subscribe. More of this every week.